This is Michael Becker, and welcome to this Tinderbox training lesson. And with me today is a guest speaker, Mark Anderson. Mark is a famous individual within the Tinderbox community because he is the author and maintainer of the aTbRef reference file, which is something that we all have learned to know and love within the Tinderbox community. So first and foremost, Mark, welcome to today's conversation. And let me, on behalf of the entire Tinderbox world, express our gratitude for your building, maintaining, and keeping the aTbRef file up in current. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, it's one of those tools and services that I personally use every single day. And again, I'm eternally grateful for it. So the reason why I wanted to bring Mark into today's lesson was he does a ton with Tinderbox. And in particular, he has had a really incredible project he's been working on in aggregating research papers from conferences and doing analysis against that, which is ideally, really one of the perfect use cases of Tinderbox, where you're pulling a lot of disparate data with a whole bunch of different types of attributes associated with it, and you want to make sense of that information. And so I wanted to have Mark share with us a little bit about where he got the information, how he got it in, how he's making sense of it. Because if you remember in previous talks, we've talked about how Tinderbox is really about empowering you with the ability to manage the 4 C's. Basically, collect information, curate that information, create your own insights from it, and then contribute it to that world. So with that in mind, Mark, can you share your screen, take it away, and walk us through your file?
Okay, right. Let's bring up share screen.
And along the way, I may interrupt you and ask questions if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, please do. Absolutely. This is quite a large Tinderbox. So let's just have a look. So we've got about 7,500. Oh, sorry, just over 7,000 notes. A much smaller number of aliases, because one of the things I've learned to do is once the file gets large, I tend to try and have as few aliases running as needed. What this file was created to do was to look at the ACM Hypertext Conference. So it's been 31 years of a quite small conference, and I wanted to look at things like what the topics were, how the subject areas have drifted, the keywords people were using, the number of discrete authors involved, whether there were what the sort of gender split was on, especially on sort of first authors and things. So the first part of this was to collect information from the conferences, and I just used the online ACM library for this. Unfortunately, in this case, their terms and conditions, even for paid-up members, don't allow scraping. So I actually did most of this, all 2,000 things, by cut and paste. But in many cases, there are ways I could have automated the information coming in. So
and just to interrupt you there. So in this case, you were manually bringing in the data, but as you pointed out, easily, if this information was in a spreadsheet or was in other types of feeds, you can easily just drop it in. Tinderbox will automatically parse that spreadsheet, and you're good to go. So
yep, if there've been
a lot of different ways to get the data into Tinderbox.
Yes, I mean my preferred thing normally is getting hold of something like either a spreadsheet or some formatted data and using Explode. Both of those are very powerful ways and quick ways of getting a lot of information into Tinderbox. Sadly, in this particular case, it wasn't available. So one of the first things I did was to set up prototypes for some of the key things I knew I needed. So we've got one for conferences, and you'll see here that so that's a reddish color there. Those are the conferences, and I'm using a display expression here. That's interesting. Another thing I can show you. So you're thinking, okay, that's just my string, but we're looking at something here that actually has a title, because you can see it's called 1987, but there's some other data. So what I'm doing here is there's an edict that runs, and that's setting the calculation that's being used there. that's being used to set these numbers. And basically what it's showing me is the number of overall items in the library for the conference. And the second one is the number of things that are full or short papers, the rest of demos, keynotes.
Yeah, and let me interrupt you right there for our listeners that may not understand that. So one of the nice things with Tinderbox is that you can have notes, and notes have a title. And notes can have the same title or they can be unique. But one of the really nice conveniences of Tinderbox is from the semantic view of it. You want to be able to, in this case, Mark is showing you, I guess 29 is the number of children or descendants. So you've got 29 children and the counted descendants in the file. So he doesn't necessarily want to be manually typing that into the name or even have it automatically being populated for the name. He wants the name to be 1987 and he wants that name to be pure. However, he wants to use the attribute in Tinderbox that is called display expression that allows him to actually have the visual representation of that name, the semantic visual representation of that name displayed with data that helps him navigate the file wherever he might be in any of the Tinderbox views. And that is a really, really powerful function, which we'll do another a training and lesson on later. But that's what he's referring to when he manages that. And just to be clear on how you would do that, display expression, he's showing you in the inspector window right now, how he has display expression pulling data from my attribute. When he was referring to edict, what he was showing was and saying was that he is having an edict run, essentially some action code that's running in the background that is automatically grabbing the name and then adding the bracket 29, 26 bracket into that display expression. So that's what you semantically see. And again, I'll show you on another training down the road of how that works. But that's a really, really nice convenience of Tinderbox that hopefully you'll take advantage of for your own work.
Yeah, and the customization here is by storing it in an attribute, it just means that when all these things are running, it's not doing an awful lot of calculation on the fly every time all the agents and rules run. And as your document grows in size, it's quite easy for that to creep up on you. And it's just a nice performance thing, which, as Michael said, we'll cover in detail another time. So I have created things for conferences and papers, and there are a fair number in here of my own basically custom user attributes. I mean, it gives me a count, but you can see here there are actually quite a lot. And you'll notice quite a few have names like have names like has and is. And what I'm doing here is I'm making booleans that allow me to record that something is part of a set of a collection of things I know I'm going to want to find later. And by having a Boolean, I can just search one attribute and find all the things I want without having to do a complex query to find all the things that give me that thing. And this is something that comes from experience, basically. Don't worry about it outset. It really reflects the incremental formalization of things. As you understand what you might want to do as you go on, you can build in little things like this that just make it easier for you down the line. Because
so
all this work.
Yeah. So let me give you an example. So for example, as a user, oops, and I just lost my back screen. So let me do that later. So as a user of Tinder, so welcome to the wonderful world and the realities of Zoom screen, green screening. So as Tinderbox goes, one of the things that you'll find is what Mark just referred to as incremental formalization. And this is a critical part, not just of your use of Tinderbox, but of thinking in general. You start brainstorming your ideas, and as those ideas evolve, you start getting more and more aware of what you want to accomplish. So for example, you might start out in your file where you have an attribute just called tags. And in that tags, you might have panel, comma, poster, comma, right? Or semicolon, sorry, because you have a list. But then later you figure out, well, you know what? And then when you want to run searches, for example, you might then later run queries that say something, if tags.contains panel, or if tags.contains poster, then you can have the Tinderbox find those items. But when you're doing it, that kind of search against a tag, you're having Tinderbox perform a lot of action. It first has to parse out that list, and then it's got to match to those items in the list. So what Mark has learned over time is that once he actually formalizes his thinking, that says, actually these tags aren't generic, they're very specific, and so therefore he can then, for instance, in a prototype, as he's doing in this case, have a Boolean attribute, a yes/no attribute that says, is this a panel or not? So later, when he runs a search, rather than having Tinderbox parse apart a list of tags to be able to determine if a note meets that criteria or not, he can just do a search on this is panel, is it yes or no? And the processing overhead for Tinderbox to do that is much lower than it is for processing a set. And so in that way, you're optimizing the performance of the Tinderbox file overall. And that becomes really important when you have a very large file like this, and you may need to be running a number of queries and link associations and such. So that just gives you some background of why he chose to do it that way. All right, Mark, keep going.
Yeah, okay. So effectively, I've collected a lot of information. Some of it is sort of, directly from fields in the library. Others I've had to extract myself. So here, where there's been an abstract, I've actually put it into the text. I actually, in this case, it was quite a body. I had to copy and paste the keywords. Again, this is the kind of thing where if you can find a way to automate it, do it, because you don't want to be doing it for 2,000 items as I had to do here. But the useful thing is, once we have this capture, we can begin to look at things. So one of the things I started doing was looking at the number of references. So what I wanted to see is, over the years, are papers in the conference citing prior work in this field? Because it's a quite narrow field. So you would expect that people do this kind of thing. So I've seen the number of references people made, the number of times it's been cited by other people in the conference, the number of in-conference references. So, for instance, this paper had 28 references. It cited 6 previous papers in the conference, and other papers in this conference series have cited it 29 times. And I picked up some other things. So we were talking about gender split and authors. So, for instance, we can see here, so Jocelyn Nard is the primary author here. And I've started keeping this information so I can then do some data visualization later on in the things.
And again, presumably you're running some rules or edicts that are determining those calculations for the
yes.
With the paper.
So actually, this one was quite a long thing, because the first thing I did for that was I got a set of all the authors. So by using the values operator, I basically got a list of all the discrete author names, and then I exploded that out into notes, and then there was a bit of sort of manual work. I did some with stamps, but basically I split all the authors out into their own notes, and then there was a bit of work that had to be done, because over time sort of styles change. So people used to use initials, now they use full names. People get married, change their last name. People use different names, especially across different ethnicities. So there are all sorts of ways in which names are actually quite complicated. So having got the list of unique names, I then went through and normalized them. And then, with the assistance of some of my group's colleagues, especially for things like East Asian names with which I'm not familiar, I populated an assumed gender. And all I did here was male, female, or unknown. This has nothing to do with current sort of gender politics or anything like this. It was simply to get to the point is there a representation in this field? What's the representation of basically non-male authors? So that's what's going on there. But you can see it involves quite a lot of data. But the other thing I was able to do was, for instance, I could get a full list of co-authors. So every author that person had co-authored with in there, this person has actually done one paper in 2016, and they're actually linked. So if I was to show the roadmap for this thing, there's only one link. I can probably give it more sense if I go to just go up and go to the B's and pick somebody I know is well represented here. Authors. You'll notice I'm using outline quite a lot. It's just that as data scales, quite a lot of things get quite hard to do in the map. So sometimes it's just easy to drop into the outline view. But you can always pull things that are of interest, smaller sets of information up into a map view at any time. So let's find the author of Tinderbox, who is here. So, Mr. M. Bernstein did one paper in 1989, and since he has now done a fair number of papers. And the outbound link count is 33. That tells me that he's done 33 papers. So Mark Bernstein's done 33 papers in this conference. He's co-authored over time with a large number of people. And I could, if I wanted, put in extra information. This is mainly there because I just repurposed the built-in people, the person prototype. But I couldn't be bothered to remove it. But it doesn't really matter. The main thing here is what I wanted to be able to do was I wanted to be able to see how this author, where they sit, how they interrelate with people within the conference. Whether I did that inside Tinderbox or exported and used a file like a system like Gephi or something like that to do a network diagram. So that's those.
Now you're pointing out some other important things. So let me pause you right here. So as I'm looking at this file, so you have what, roughly 2,000 plus papers you'd mentioned that you pulled into this file. Unfortunately, when you did this manually, but ideally, in the future through a spreadsheet. I think you then said something else that's really important, and you referenced a Tinderbox function called the value operator. And so I wanted to emphasize that a little bit. So for those that are listening, so what Mark wanted to do here is he wanted to pull out the names of the authors. And in other applications, you would do that manually. With Tinderbox, you can do an operator called value. And essentially you could, for instance, say my list equals values, parenthesis, and then the list of the notes that you want to pull those values from, and the attribute that you want to pull those values from. And then when you run that action code, it's going to create unique notes with those values. So in this case, he could have 2,000 notes with a bunch of authors in that author's attribute, and Tinderbox scrapes the authors those unique instances of those names from every note that has within that attribute authors, and populates and creates unique and new notes for them, which would take hours in any other situation, and Tinderbox takes a matter of seconds. So that, again, a really important example of the way that's done here. And then obviously has manual normalization and cleanup that you would do after that. Yeah, in your Mark, you were saying?
So I've just showed up. I mean, in aTbRef, it's described, and the technique, the nice technique you can do is effectively you can get all the values in something. You can sort them, make sure they're deduped if you think there may be multiple instances of the same value.
So, for example, in that regard, right about a third of the way, middle of the screen, you're saying collect all. In this example, it says populate my list, collect all of the notes. And then .unique, which is saying just pull the .unique. Yeah. That's where you're getting just the unique instances of that particular name. Yeah. So there's a lot of really unique functions that we can do within Tinderbox. And again, Mark's example here has a really nice aspect of it. So Mark, let's we could spend hours in this particular file. But now what we've learned so far is you've kind of demonstrated your ability to pull very large data sets into Tinderbox. You've demonstrated the ability to easily parse data apart, stick it into notes, do the manual work of your thinking to be able to normalize it and start making sense of the data. One of the things that I found particularly interesting in what you were doing here then too is then how do you go about outputting this data into a format that is meaningful? And maybe you can show a little bit of your thinking around exports and manipulation of outputs.
Yeah, so I'm working on a paper with someone at the moment, and one of the things that they wanted to do is do some machine learning. So they asked me, I basically took the PDFs of all of the reports that had the papers that had a PDF, and did a plain text extraction, which is a thing for outside Tinderbox. But then said, oh, well, can I have a sort of JSON file with, a small amount of information about all that? I think, crikey, that's sort of 8,000 different, papers they're going to need.
And a JSON file is just a standard computer format for how computers read.
Yeah, it's a JavaScript based. I mean, it's plain text if you open it up, but if you're not familiar with it, just think of it as a data format. But it's very standard across computers. But I was able to basically go to. So I had all these. So this is 1,054 things. By copy and pasting this, I put this into BBEdit, which is just a sort of basically a all-purpose text tool. So in fact, I can actually do this. So now I've got the names of all the files. And in fact, I might still have the thing cached here. Okay. So then I did a little regular expression. I said, right, I don't want the text on the end, so I'll just replace all of those. And then I said I wanted to put it in there. So basically then I concatenated, So what I did was I then told the computer, right, I don't want all those on your separate lines. What I want you to do is to replace every line return with a semicolon. So I ended up with one long thing, which I could then paste into Tinderbox. Where did I put it? As my config note. And in here, effectively, are 1,054 discrete titles, which allowed me to go through and work out which of these papers had plain text notes. So I could then mark those up with an attribute.
And
so
how
that allowed you
that. So how do you know? How are you matching one of those numbers to plain text?
We're doing a lookup, and I'm trying to remember if I've got.
So could you open up one of the articles that happen to have plain text and show us where that field is? Like, where would we see that number in one of your notes?
Let me just go to. That's probably got one, and I think it will need to be in user attribute. And what I did is I populated this. So I basically did a lookup, and I said, does the value? I first of all worked out what is the file, what is the sort of
so that's what I was. That's what I was. Sorry, let's pause right there. That's what I was.
So that was
what happened.
So first of all,
yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So I had a reference for each paper. And I said, well, the bit I want is that number at the end. So I split that out and I put that in a separate attribute. And then I matched that attribute against this big long list. And so I said, does this value exist in that long list? If it does, set has text file.
Right. And there's a function called lookup that would help.
Yes, actually, this is list contains any of, which is another quite useful, quite new thing. I'll very quickly bring that up. So it's list.
Okay. So essentially, that's running a search that says, does the list contain any of these items?
Yeah. Does and so now this is the thing. I had this one attribute that meant that I could then go and make an agent, my agent of plain text files, and the query for that is as simple as that. Yep. Because I'd set this Boolean earlier. So this now finds me my 1054 files. And then what I wanted to do was I wanted to have an output that looks like this, which was what I was asked for. Don't worry exactly what's there, but as you can see, there's lots of formatting in there. So how do we do this? I think this is the thing that Michael wanted me to show. So that's done using an export template. And it actually, it might look odd. A thing to understand here is you'll see some of the templates are nested in the outline. Don't worry about that. All templates, there's no relationship between a nested template. It's not aware of being inside another one. It's either a template or it isn't. So the nesting is just the convenience of knowing, right, this set of three things here are all associated together. So it starts by, I need the front and back end of the format, which is, that's the front bit and that's the back bit. And then I'm saying, please give me the contents of my string attribute for the note that's using this template, and then I want you to render that using this plain text JSON item. And what that then does is I have a note set up here where I said that points to the agent. The reason for this was so I could, that this was to allow me to have a number of different templates reusing the same agent. So in other words, I could do the report from a note without having to reset the template on the agent. So it's saying, right, go and get me the contents of this agent, which of course now has lots of aliases. And I want you to use the template plain text JSON item. And this just says, just give me the children of the note using a further different template called plain text JSON item. So what that's doing is that's saying, oh, agent, please get me all your children, which are the aliases within the agent. And then I want you to render each of them with this information. So this is where the volume of it gets done. And it just goes through that list and it fills out and adds to the export.
So let's just pause right there. So what's happening in the export file is you're having it type the word file : and then it's going out and providing this attribute $saffron.home. Is that,
yes, that's something that's not a Tinderbox thing. That's for the machine learning tool that it's going for.
Got it. But the Tinderbox thing is a parent value plain text file. So on that first line,
this is someone on the far side of the planet can take this data and just rip through it.
Right.
But basically, I'm taking the this is just the name of the file. Now here, I'm doing an extra thing. So there's an attribute called JSON encode, which I can use. It basically, there are things that this format doesn't like. So it doesn't like having straight double quotes in a value. It doesn't like having a // So that extra operator just puts a backslash to escape. It's nothing you need to worry about. If you need to use this format, the information is all written down. You can do it. But so sometimes you just pull the value of the attribute. Here I'm pulling the value of the attribute, but actually applying an operator to that value before I put it into the template. Here, I'm actually taking the authors and I'm formatting them out into a list. So I get a list of all the authors in double quotes with a comma and a space between each one.
Let me pause you right there. So if for those people that if you were just to say value parenthesis authors close parenthesis, you would pull in all of your authors, but they'd be separated by semicolons. Yep. They wouldn't actually be a comma separated list like you'd normally read in a document. So using the operator authors.format what he's doing is he's interjecting that comma and within that, so it's rendering the way he wants it to be displayed. And again, that's another powerful capability of Tinderbox, is at the end of the day, what Tinderbox allows you to do is parse out your work. And so your first step is that collection and curation stage. The next step is your, those are your first two steps. The next step, which he demonstrated earlier in this conversation, the next step is that creation stage, and that's where he's creating insight. And then finally, the contribution stage. And Tinderbox allows you in a really unique way in the contribution stage to really format your data into any output that you want, right? And so you're not really necessarily bound by the four walls of, say, Word or the cells of Excel or the structure of a PowerPoint. Tinderbox allows you to create pretty much uniformly within your really only bounded by your own creativity, and not by the bounds of an output software like a Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. And then when you're ready to publish, you can then have it presented in any output you want, whether or not be an Excel file, or in this case, he's manipulating it so it's presented in a very clean, structured JSON file.
So, I've highlighted there, so the bit that's highlighted on the screen, so there is a paper with multiple authors, and sure enough, so, this is author one. This is in the order that they exist in the attributes. But this means that the bit of software that's going to read this can pull that out and do things with it.
Right.
And the nice thing of this process is this came in the Morning Mail from someone who I think is Canadian, working in the Republic of Ireland, who said, oh yes, can I have this? But could you give me something in this format? So I had a look at that. And okay, I've been fiddling around with sort of text formats for a while, but the main thing is once you get the basic principle of this sort of envelope and letter way of using things, this actually took 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, and again,
I didn't know I needed.
I think that's a really powerful thing to think back. If we take a step back, and this is what I'm so excited about when I see your project is, we spend so much time in our lives messing around with like perfecting format and when we really should be spending that time creating our knowledge, right? And so Tinderbox separates those elements and allows us to do it in separate pieces. And once our knowledge is right, getting the output into the format actually is, it takes a little bit of effort, but once you learn the tool, it's pretty trivial. What you do is you push it into another document where that document is designed for output production, whereas Tinderbox is not necessarily so. So again, I just think this is just a really nice demonstration of, taking thousands and thousands of pieces of raw content, processing it through the process of Tinderbox, and being able to export it into a variety of different formats.
Because one of the other things, I won't walk you, there's probably not time to walk you all through it, but what I just was going to go and show was one of the other things that came out of this file is, let's get the URL for it. Okay. One of the other things that I've done out of this was to take all this information and make a complete network graph of all the papers with a line linking each paper to the papers it cites. So you can have and it makes a lovely great big sort of ball of twine. The visualization needs working on, but the information was all there, and that was one of these other. So that was another two exports. Nodes and edges is just a whoops. What's happened there? Nodes and edges is just a sort of networking term for the nodes are the notes in Tinderbox and the edges are the links. And so I basically have exported a large number of notes and links, which I put into an open source tool called Gephi, and that makes me, allows me to make some nice, fun pictures. But under the fun bit, half of the idea is to actually produce the visualization, because the output of all this, which I think will be common to other people, whether you're doing it for research or you're doing it for business purposes, is that it's probably not until you have that extracted data, be it a graph or a report, that a wider audience can actually get to grips with this information. So that's your delivery point, and so all the sort of pain points of getting to that end are where there's a benefit. And the joy to me of sort of using something like Tinderbox is just that I don't need to know. I haven't got to sit down and work out what the process is when I don't even know the structure of the data that I'm using, which is typical when you're doing knowledge work. You know there's stuff in there. You know roughly where the stuff you're interested in is, but you don't know exactly what it is. You don't know how it fits together, and you don't really know what the relationships are. And certainly the last thing you want to do is to start with a load of baseless assumptions. So the joy of a tool like this is to be able to take lots of information, pull it all together, and then start to pull out these emergent relationships.
Yes, and teasing them apart and playing with the data and just really enjoying the whole process. So Mark, thank you for taking the time and sharing the file with us. And again, our eternal gratitude for your maintenance of the aTbRef and keeping that up and running. So again, really appreciate it, and we'll hope to have you back and you can share some more of your Tinderbox skills in future lessons.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thanks.